Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into the critical clinical pathway of evaluating and managing acute intestinal obstruction. We're going to map out this life-threatening presentation using the classic DAPSA framework to give you an ironclad roadmap for your practice. If you're looking to really solidify your clinical skills based right on the source literature, you are absolutely in the right place.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll hit the acute abdomen, cardinal features, small versus large bowel, root causes, surgical emergencies, and wrap up with immediate management. Let's get into it.
All right, part 1, the acute abdomen.
Starting with the D in our framework, definition. What are we actually talking about here? Well, according to the East and Central African Journal of Surgery, an acute abdomen encompasses sudden, non-traumatic abdominal pain lasting a maximum of just 5 days. That 5-day window is key. It's a massive umbrella, right? It could be something totally self-limiting or literally a life-threatening surgical emergency. The clock is absolutely ticking here, and this broad presentation often hides time-sensitive gastrointestinal blockages or perforations that need your attention immediately.
Moving right along to part 2, cardinal features. Let's look at the S and D PSI camp, signs. If your patient rolls through the doors with this classic quartet of symptoms, your suspicion for a mechanical bowel blockage needs to shoot through the roof. The Oxford Handbook paints a vivid picture of these 4 cardinal features. You've got vomiting, which, brace yourself, can even become feculent if the obstruction is established and things start fermenting. You've got colic abdominal pain, because the bowel is practically fighting against a brick wall trying to peristalse. Constipation, though remember, a high blockage might not cause absolute constipation right away. And finally, ballooning abdominal distension that just gets worse as the clock ticks.
Next up, part 3, small versus large bowel obstruction.
Differentiating between these two dictates absolutely everything you do next. For small bowel obstructions, think early vomiting, higher central colicky pain, and honestly, less crazy distension. On an X-ray, you'll spot central gas shadows, and this is absolutely crucial, the lines of the valvulae can even cross the entire width of the lumen. Now, flip that for the large bowel. Vomiting is really late to the party, the pain is lower and way more constant, and the distension, severe. Rad-wise, you're looking for peripheral gas shadows, and those haustra do not cross the whole width. Keep that straight, and you're golden.
All right, part 4, causes of obstruction. Okay, so we know where it is, now what's actually causing it. This neatly covers the etiology phase of our framework. It's like a giant sorting hat based on surgical texts, luminal, mural, or extramural, inside the tube, in the wall itself, or pressing from the outside. Notice how malignancies, like carcinomas, absolutely dominate the large bowel wall, while hernias and a volvulus tend to strike from the outside. Whether it's a rogue gallstone trapped inside, a Crohn's stricture growing within the tissue, or an external hernia squeezing it shut. Breaking it down into this anatomical framework means you just won't miss a thing.
But wait, I really want to highlight one major culprit here: surgical adhesions. They cause a staggering 60% of all small bowel obstructions. 60! And the wild part, which the Oxford Handbook points out, is the absolute irony of it all. To fix it, you often have to go in and surgically divide those fibrous bands. But just handling the bowel during that surgery sparks inflammation that creates, you guessed it, even more fibrous tethers down the road. It's a total vicious cycle, and exactly why surgeons really drag their feet on operating for small bowel obstructions unless they absolutely have to.
Moving into the danger zone. Part 5, surgical emergencies.
We are hitting the complications phase of our framework now. Let's establish the baseline first, the simple obstruction. This is a mechanical roadblock at just one single point. The big takeaway here, there is zero vascular compromise. The tissue is completely viable and non-ischemic. It's getting blood. Yes, the patient absolutely needs your care, but their bowel isn't actively dying right then and there.
But man, do the stakes skyrocket with a closed-loop obstruction. Picture a mechanical nightmare. The bowel is blocked off at 2 distinct points. Think of a sigmoid volvulus, where the bowel literally twists on its mesentery into this crazy coffee bean shape on an X-ray. Or imagine a distal colon tumor combined with a competent ileocecal valve. That valve acts like a one-way door. Gas gets stuck in the colon and can't go back up. So you've got gas and fluid trapped with nowhere to escape. It balloons into a grossly distended loop at extreme risk of just popping. And how do you know it's right on the edge of popping? The magic number is 12. As pressure builds in that closed loop, the caecum, which is the widest, thinnest part of the colon, takes all the punishment. If you glance at that x-ray and see the cecum stretching past 12 centimeters in diameter, stop everything. You are looking at a giant red flag for imminent rupture. It's an absolute drop-everything emergency.
Then we reach the absolute worst-case scenario, the strangulated obstruction. This is where the arterial blood supply is choked off. The tissue is actively infarcted, it's dying. And you'll see the clinical picture completely flip here. That crampy, colicky pain, it's suddenly turned sharp, constant, and highly localized. You're going to see peritonism, an elevated white cell count, a raging fever. The patient is going to look incredibly toxic and way sicker than you'd expect from a standard blockage. When you see this, it is an absolute mandate for emergency surgery.
Finally, bringing it home with Part 6, immediate medical management.
So, hitting the management piece of our framework. 3 words: drip and suck. It's an old-school, punchy phrase straight from the Oxford Handbook, and it is your absolute go-to first-line protocol for decompressing that GI tract and stabilizing your patient. It sounds almost too simple, but physiologically, it's brilliant.
Okay, let's break down what drip and suck actually looks like on the ward. First, the suck. You drop a nasogastric tube down to vacuum out the stomach contents and take the pressure off. Then, the drip, aggressive IV fluids. Why? Well, just making a patient nil by mouth isn't enough to rest the bowel. An obstructed bowel will literally rage secrete up to 9 liters of fluid a day straight into its own lumen. That is a massive fluid shift causing severe dehydration. So you've got to aggressively replace that volume and fix those electrolytes. Give them good painkillers, keep them strictly nil by mouth, and pop in a urinary catheter to watch their fluid status and hourly output like a hawk. This medical stabilization buys you the crucial time you need to arrange a CT scan.
I'm going to leave you with a massive clinical pitfall to chew on. Say a patient rolls in with a large bowel obstruction. You do your exam, and you feel a tense, incredibly tender, palpable cecum. What's your move? Based on everything we just broke down from the literature today, that tense, tender cecum is the classic hallmark of a closed-loop obstruction about to blow. So, do you play it cool and wait for the conservative drip and suck to do its thing, or do you immediately scramble the surgical team for an urgent laparotomy? I'll let you ponder the stakes on that one, because making that exact call right there, that is exactly what saves lives on the surgical ward. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and definitely keep these frameworks in your back pocket for your next shift.